Tonight, we travel back more than 1,000 years to the vast lands of medieval Persia, a place of endless deserts, distant mountains, busy caravan routes, and cities filled with merchants, craftsmen, poets, and travelers. When many people think of Persia, they imagine magnificent palaces, beautiful gardens, colorful carpets, and wealthy kings. But for most people, life looked very different. The vast majority of Persians were not rulers or nobles. They were farmers, shepherds, laborers, merchants, and craftsmen. Their days were filled with hard work, uncertainty, and challenges that modern people rarely think about. Something as simple as finding clean water could shape an entire day. A small illness could become a serious danger. A journey to the next village could take hours beneath the burning desert sun. Tonight, we will slowly explore what everyday life was really like for ordinary people living in medieval Persia. So find a comfortable place to rest, relax your shoulders, take a slow breath, and let us begin our gentle journey into the distant past. Long before the first rays of sunlight touched the rooftops of a Persian village, many households were already awake. A small fire crackled softly. The air carried the faint scent of smoke. And somewhere inside the home, preparations for bread making had begun. Bread was the heart of daily life. Without it, a meal often felt incomplete. For rich and poor alike, bread appeared on the table almost every day. Yet, unlike today, obtaining bread required much more than a visit to a shop. It began with grain. Months earlier, farmers had planted wheat or barley in carefully prepared fields. They had watched the crops grow through changing seasons. They had prayed for enough water and favorable weather. Finally, after harvest, the grain was gathered and stored. But harvested grain could not immediately become bread. First, it needed to be ground into flour. This process demanded patience. Large grinding stones were commonly used. Some households performed the work themselves. Others visited communal mills. The grinding process could take considerable time, especially for larger families. Once flour was available, the next stage began. Water was added. The ingredients were mixed together by hand. The dough slowly formed beneath skilled fingers. Years of experience taught people how the dough should feel. Too dry and the bread would become hard, too wet and it would be difficult to bake properly. There were no measuring cups, no written recipes for most households. Knowledge passed from one generation to the next. Mothers taught daughters. Grandparents shared techniques learned decades earlier. The preparation itself became part of family tradition. After kneading came waiting. The dough rested.
Long before clocks, alarms, or electric lights existed, the people of medieval Persia woke with the natural rhythm of the world around them. For many families, the day began before sunrise. The darkness of night still covered the land. Stars remained visible above the quiet villages and desert plains. The air was cool and still. In many homes, the first sounds of the morning came from animals: a donkey shifting in its shelter, a goat calling softly, chickens beginning to stir. Most ordinary families lived in simple homes made from mud brick. These buildings helped protect people from the intense heat of the day. Their thick walls kept interiors cooler during summer and warmer during winter nights. Inside the home, family members often slept in shared spaces. Privacy, as we understand it today, was rare. Several generations could live under the same roof. Grandparents, parents, children, and relatives often shared a small household. As dawn approached, people slowly prepared for another day of work. There was little opportunity to sleep late. Fields needed attention, animals needed feeding, water needed collecting, food needed preparing.
Every member of the household usually had responsibilities. Even children were expected to help with daily tasks. For farmers, the coolest hours of the morning were especially valuable. Working after midday could become exhausting beneath the Persian sun. Because of this, many laborers tried to complete important work before the hottest part of the day arrived. Outside, the eastern horizon slowly began to brighten. A soft golden light appeared above distant hills and desert landscapes. The village gradually awakened. Doors opened. Footsteps appeared along narrow paths. Smoke began rising from cooking fires. The scent of freshly baked bread drifted through the morning air. For a brief moment, before the heat and activity of the day fully arrived, the village felt peaceful, calm, almost timeless. Yet everyone knew that many hours of labor still lay ahead. The challenges of medieval Persian life were only beginning, and one of the most important challenges awaited nearly every household each morning: finding enough clean water.
As the first light of morning spread across the Persian landscape, many families faced one of the most important tasks of the entire day: finding water. Today, most people can simply turn a handle and watch clean water flow from a tap. For the ordinary people of medieval Persia, things were very different. Water was precious. Every drop mattered. Across much of Persia, rainfall was limited. Large regions were dry for long periods of the year. The land could appear beautiful and vast, but beneath that beauty was a constant challenge. Without water, crops could not grow, animals could not survive, families could not cook, clean, or drink. For many villages, the nearest reliable water source might be a well, a spring, or an underground channel known as a qanat. These remarkable engineering systems carried water from distant mountains beneath the ground, protecting it from the hot desert sun. Some qanats stretched for many kilometers. They were among the greatest achievements of Persian engineering. Yet even with these systems, obtaining water often required effort. Many people began the task shortly after waking. Men, women, and children carried clay jars, leather containers, or metal vessels. The journey to a well could take several minutes. In some places, it could take much longer. The path was often familiar. Generations of villagers had walked the same route countless times before. As people approached the water source, they might meet neighbors doing the same thing. The well became more than a source of water. It became a place where news was exchanged, stories were shared, friendships were maintained. Daily life quietly unfolded around it. But gathering water was not always simple. Heavy containers became difficult to carry. A single filled jar could weigh more than many children could comfortably lift. Families often made multiple trips each day. Water was needed for drinking. Water was needed for cooking. Water was needed for animals. And whenever possible, water was needed for washing. During dry years, the situation became even more difficult. Wells could drop lower, springs could weaken, streams could shrink. Villagers sometimes worried constantly about whether enough water would remain until the next season. The fear of drought was never far away. A poor rainfall season could affect entire communities. Fields might produce smaller harvests. As the first light of morning spread across the Persian landscape, many families faced one of the most important tasks of the entire day: finding water. Today, most people can simply turn a handle and watch clean water flow from a tap. For the ordinary people of medieval Persia, things were very different. Water was precious. Every drop mattered. Across much of Persia, rainfall was limited. Large regions were dry for long periods of the year. The land could appear beautiful and vast, but beneath that beauty was a constant challenge. Without water, crops could not grow, animals could not survive, families could not cook, clean, or drink. For many villages, the nearest reliable water source might be a well, a spring, or an underground channel known as a qanat. These remarkable engineering systems carried water from distant mountains beneath the ground, protecting it from the hot desert sun. Some qanats stretched for many kilometers. They were among the greatest achievements of Persian engineering. Yet even with these systems, obtaining water often required effort. Many people began the task shortly after waking. Men, women, and children carried clay jars, leather containers, or metal vessels. The journey to a well could take several minutes. In some places, it could take much longer. The path was often familiar. Generations of villagers had walked the same route countless times before. As people approached the water source, they might meet neighbors doing the same thing. The well became more than a source of water. It became a place where news was exchanged, stories were shared, friendships were maintained. Daily life quietly unfolded around it. But gathering water was not always simple. Heavy containers became difficult to carry. A single filled jar could weigh more than many children could comfortably lift. Families often made multiple trips each day. Water was needed for drinking. Water was needed for cooking. Water was needed for animals, and whenever possible, water was needed for washing. During dry years, the situation became even more difficult. Wells could drop lower, springs could weaken, streams could shrink. Villagers sometimes worried constantly about whether enough water would remain until the next season. The fear of drought was never far away. A poor rainfall season could affect entire communities. Fields might produce smaller harvests.
Food prices could rise. Families might be forced to ration what little they had. Even when water was available, cleanliness was not guaranteed. People understood that some sources were better than others. Fresh spring water was highly valued. Stagnant water was less desirable. Yet choices were often limited. People used what they could find. Every household learned to manage its supply carefully. Nothing was wasted. A spilled jar of water was not merely an inconvenience. It represented lost effort, lost time, and sometimes real hardship. As the sun climbed higher into the sky, the temperature slowly increased. The cool morning air began to disappear. Those carrying water hurried to return home before the heat became overwhelming. Soon village pathways filled with movement. Farmers headed toward fields. Merchants prepared their goods. Animals were led toward grazing areas. And in homes across Persia, the day's water supply had finally arrived. For now, because tomorrow the same task would begin all over again. And for many Persian families, the search for water never truly ended. By the time the morning water had been gathered and carried home, many Persian farmers were already making their way towards the fields. For them, the day had truly begun. Agriculture was the foundation of life in medieval Persia. Without farmers, villages could not survive, cities could not grow, markets could not function. Nearly every loaf of bread, every bowl of grain, and every piece of fruit depended upon countless hours of human labor. Yet farming in Persia was rarely easy. The land could be generous, but it could also be unforgiving. Rainfall was often uncertain. Some years brought enough moisture for healthy crops. Other years brought disappointment and worry. Farmers could never take nature for granted. As the sun slowly rose higher into the sky, workers spread across the fields.
Some carried simple wooden tools.
Others guided animals that helped pull plows through the soil. The work required patience, it required strength, and above all, it required time. There were no tractors, no modern irrigation pumps, no machines to quickly plant or harvest crops. Almost everything depended upon human effort. A single field could require weeks of careful attention. Seeds had to be planted at the proper time. Water channels needed maintenance. Weeds had to be removed. Animals had to be kept away from valuable crops. Every task demanded energy. Every task demanded attention. For many farming families, everyone contributed. Men worked in the fields. Women often assisted with agricultural tasks while also caring for the household. Children learned responsibilities at a young age. Even the youngest members of the family often helped with simple jobs. Life revolved around the growing season. A successful harvest could bring relief and stability. A failed harvest could create hardship that lasted for months. As morning turned toward midday, the heat intensified. Across many parts of Persia, summer temperatures could become overwhelming. The air shimmered above the ground. Dust drifted across distant paths. The sunlight seemed endless. Farmers often paused briefly for food and water, but long periods of rest were a luxury few could afford. The crops could not wait. The irrigation channels needed constant attention. A damaged canal could threaten an entire field. Water was too valuable to waste. Many Persian farming communities relied upon carefully managed irrigation systems. Some of these systems had existed for generations. Villagers worked together to maintain them. The success of one family often depended upon the cooperation of many others. This created strong community ties. Neighbors depended on one another. A broken water channel affected everyone. A successful harvest benefited everyone. As afternoon arrived, exhaustion slowly began to build. Muscles ached. Hands became rough and worn. Clothing gathered dust from hours spent outdoors. Yet the work continued. The sun still hung high above the landscape. There was always another task waiting. Another section of field needing attention, another repair requiring completion. By late afternoon, long shadows finally began to stretch across the ground. The worst heat of the day slowly faded. Birds returned to the skies above the fields. A gentle breeze occasionally crossed the land. For farmers, these moments brought a small sense of relief. But the day was not yet over. Animals still needed care. Tools needed cleaning. Plans for tomorrow's work needed discussion. Only after sunset could many families finally return home. Even then, rest remained limited. Another dawn would soon arrive. Another day of labor would begin. And so the rhythm of medieval Persian farming continued, season after season, year after year. It was a life built upon endurance, a life shaped by the land itself. And although farmers formed the backbone of Persian society, their work was constantly challenged by one powerful force they could never control, the intense heat of the Persian summer. In many regions of medieval Persia, summer was not simply a season, it was a test of survival. The sun could transform ordinary daily tasks into exhausting struggles. As temperatures climbed higher and higher, people learned countless ways to adapt to the relentless heat. But no matter how experienced they became, the Persian summer always demanded respect.
In many parts of medieval Persia, summer arrived slowly. At first, the days simply became warmer. The mornings remained pleasant. The evenings stayed comfortable. But as the weeks passed, the heat grew stronger and stronger, until it seemed to dominate every part of daily life. For ordinary people, the Persian summer was not just an inconvenience. It shaped their schedules, their work, their homes, and even their thoughts. The sun rose over the horizon each morning with remarkable intensity. By midday, the landscape often appeared almost motionless. The bright sunlight reflected from the earth. Dust shimmered in the distance. The air itself seemed to tremble. Farmers working in open fields felt the heat directly. Merchants walking along roads searched constantly for shade. Travelers crossing long distances carefully planned their journeys to avoid the hottest hours. Many people learned that fighting the heat was impossible. The wiser choice was to work around it. This is why so much activity happened early in the morning. Before sunrise and shortly afterward, the air was cooler. Tasks that would become exhausting later in the day felt manageable. As temperatures climbed, people gradually slowed their pace. Whenever possible, they rested during the hottest part of the afternoon. In villages and towns, homes were often designed with the climate in mind. Thick mud brick walls helped block some of the heat. Small windows reduced direct sunlight. Courtyards created shaded spaces where families could gather. Some buildings remained surprisingly cool despite the intense temperatures outside. Generations of builders had learned how to work with nature rather than against it. Even so, relief was never complete. Inside many homes, the air could still feel heavy during particularly hot days. People drank water carefully. They protected valuable food from spoilage. Animals required extra attention. A thirsty goat, sheep, or donkey could quickly become weak under the summer sun. Water sources became even more important during these months. A reliable well could determine whether a village thrived or struggled. Farmers watched irrigation channels closely. Every drop mattered. Fields demanded constant care. Crops could suffer if water arrived too late. Entire harvests sometimes depended on decisions made during a few critical weeks. Travel during summer brought its own challenges. Caravan merchants crossing Persia's deserts faced endless stretches of dry land. The sun beat down on travelers for hours. Sometimes entire groups adjusted their schedules to move during colder periods. They rested when the heat became overwhelming and continued once conditions improved. For those traveling through the desert, shade was precious. A single tree could become a welcome refuge.
A roadside caravanserai, a resting place for travelers, offered protection, water, and temporary comfort. Such places often felt like small islands of relief in an ocean of heat. Children experienced summer differently. Whenever duties allowed, they searched for cool corners, shaded courtyards, or breezy spots near water. Yet even they understood the realities of the season. The heat affected everyone, young and old alike. As afternoon slowly turned towards evening, the world began to change. The sunlight softened. Shadows lengthened across the ground. The air gradually cooled. People emerged from shaded spaces. Work resumed. Conversations returned to village streets. Markets became lively once again. The harshest part of the day had passed. For a short while, life felt easier. But everyone knew that tomorrow would bring another hot sunrise, another day beneath the powerful Persian sun. And while summer heat created many difficulties, it was often followed by something equally challenging: the sudden cold that arrived after sunset in the desert. As the final light faded from the horizon, the Persian landscape began a remarkable transformation. The heat of the day slowly drifted away. The warm air that had covered the land for hours started to cool. A gentle breeze sometimes crossed the desert. The bright blue sky deepened into shades of purple and black, and above, countless stars appeared. For many people living in medieval Persia, the night sky was one of the most familiar sights in the world. Without electric lights, the stars seemed brighter than most modern people can imagine. Entire rivers of light stretched across the heavens. Constellations guided travelers. The moon illuminated roads and fields. The night possessed a quiet beauty, yet it also brought discomfort. The desert released its warmth surprisingly fast. Temperatures that had felt unbearable during the afternoon could become chilly after dark. In some regions, the change was dramatic. Travelers learned never to trust the daytime heat. A person who prepared only for the sun might suffer greatly once night arrived. Caravan merchants crossing Persia's vast trade routes understood this well. Throughout the day, they protected themselves from heat. At night, they wrapped themselves in heavy cloaks and blankets. Their camps often formed small circles in the darkness. Camels rested nearby. Cooking fires flickered gently. Conversations became quieter as exhaustion settled over the group. Many travelers welcomed the cooler temperatures. Moving through the desert at night was often easier than traveling beneath the blazing afternoon sun. The moon provided enough light for experienced guides. The air felt fresher. Animals endured the journey more comfortably. For this reason, some caravans preferred to travel during the evening and early morning hours. In villages, families also prepared for the nightly drop in temperature. Mud brick homes that helped protect against daytime heat offered some warmth after sunset. Doors were closed, blankets were brought out, families gathered together.
Shared body heat often provided additional comfort during colder nights. Children sometimes listened to stories told by grandparents. Old legends, poems, and family histories passed from one generation to another. These quiet moments helped strengthen family bonds. Outside, the village gradually became silent. Animals settled into their shelters, market stalls stood empty. Roads that had been busy only hours earlier became calm and deserted. Yet night carried dangers as well. Travelling after dark could be risky. Uneven ground became harder to see.
Wild animals occasionally wandered near settlements. Bandits sometimes used darkness as cover. Most people preferred the safety of familiar surroundings. For shepherds spending nights away from villages, conditions could be especially difficult. They slept near their flocks. The open landscape offered little protection from cold winds. Many became skilled at finding sheltered locations among hills and rocky terrain. Their survival often depended on experience and careful planning. Winter nights could be even harsher. In mountainous regions of Persia, temperatures occasionally dropped far below freezing. Snow sometimes covered the landscape. Travel became difficult. Food supplies required careful management. The challenges of the season affected entire communities. Despite these hardships, the nighttime hours also provided something valuable: rest. After long days of labor, people finally had a chance to recover. Tomorrow would bring more work, more responsibilities, more challenges. For now, however, they could sit quietly beneath the stars and enjoy a brief moment of peace. The same stars watched over emperors and farmers alike, merchants and shepherds, rich and poor. For a few hours, the busy world slowed down. But with the coming dawn, another challenge would return: the endless struggle to secure enough food for the family.
For most people in medieval Persia, food was never something taken for granted. Every meal represented work, every loaf of bread represented effort, and every successful harvest represented months of patience and uncertainty. Unlike the modern world, there were no supermarkets filled with endless choices, no refrigerated trucks delivering fresh products every day, no guarantees that tomorrow's meal would be waiting. The ordinary people of Persia lived much closer to the realities of nature. Their food depended on seasons, rainfall, harvests, and sometimes a little luck. For most people in medieval Persia, food was not merely a source of enjoyment, it was a daily concern, a responsibility, and sometimes a worry that never fully disappeared. Today, many people can choose from hundreds of foods without much thought. In medieval Persia, choices were often far more limited. Families ate what was available, what could be grown locally, what could be stored safely, and what they could afford. For ordinary villagers, bread formed the foundation of nearly every meal. A household without bread faced serious difficulties. Wheat and barley were among the most important crops throughout much of Persia. Farmers worked tirelessly to grow them. After harvest, grain had to last for many months. Families carefully protected their supplies from moisture, insects, and hungry animals. Every sack of grain represented security. Every lost sack represented danger. Many meals were simple: bread, vegetables, herbs, dates, yogurt, sometimes beans or lentils. These foods may seem modest today, but they provided essential nourishment. When available, families added fruits such as pomegranates, grapes, figs, or melons. Persia's climate supported a remarkable variety of crops in certain regions, yet abundance was never guaranteed. The seasons controlled everything. Spring brought hope, summer demanded patience, autumn brought harvest, winter tested preparation. A successful harvest could fill storage rooms and provide comfort. A poor harvest created uncertainty. Families constantly measured their supplies. Would the grain last until next season? Would there be enough food for everyone? Could they survive another difficult year? These questions occupied many minds.
Animals also played an important role. Goats, sheep, and chickens provided valuable resources. Milk could become yogurt or cheese. Eggs added variety to meals. Occasionally, meat appeared on the table, but for many ordinary families, meat was not an everyday food. It was often reserved for special occasions, celebrations, or important gatherings. Because food required so much effort to produce, waste was taken seriously. Leftovers were reused whenever possible. Stale bread found new purposes. Vegetable scraps sometimes fed animals. Nothing valuable was discarded carelessly.
In towns and cities, markets offered greater variety. Merchants displayed spices, fruits, nuts, grains, and other goods. The colourful stalls attracted buyers from all walks of life. Yet even here, prices mattered. Poor families often had little room for luxury. Every coin spent on food required careful consideration. Travellers faced additional challenges. Caravan merchants crossing long distances needed food that could survive weeks on the road. Dried fruits, nuts, flatbread, preserved foods. These practical supplies helped sustain journeys across deserts and mountains. Even wealthy households could not completely escape nature's influence. Droughts reduced harvests, floods damaged fields, pests destroyed crops. Entire regions sometimes suffered shortages. When this happened, food prices rose rapidly. The poorest members of society felt the effects first. A single failed harvest could change many lives. Yet despite these difficulties, Persian communities developed remarkable resilience. Families shared resources. Neighbours helped one another. Villages worked together during difficult times. These bonds often made survival possible. As evening approached and cooking fires began to glow, families gathered for their meals. The food might be simple, the portions might be modest, but after a long day of work, even a basic meal offered comfort. For a few moments people could rest. They could talk. They could enjoy the company of loved ones. And they could be grateful that food remained on the table. Still, obtaining food was only the first challenge. Preparing it every day required its own labour. And no food was more important to medieval Persians than bread.
Long before sunrise, in homes throughout medieval Persia, one familiar task was already beginning: the making of bread. For many families, bread was not simply part of the meal, it was the meal. The smell of fresh bread drifting through a village was one of the most common experiences of everyday life. Yet few modern people realize how much work stood behind each loaf. There were no electric ovens, no packaged flour, no bakeries on every corner. Every step required time, effort, and skill. And for countless Persian families, bread making was one of the most important responsibilities of the day.
Long before the first rays of sunlight touched the rooftops of a Persian village, many households were already awake. A small fire crackled softly. The air carried the faint scent of smoke, and somewhere inside the home, preparations for bread making had begun. Bread was the heart of daily life. Without it, a meal often felt incomplete. For rich and poor alike, bread appeared on the table almost every day. Yet, unlike today, obtaining bread required much more than a visit to a shop. It began with grain. Months earlier, farmers had planted wheat or barley in carefully prepared fields. They had watched the crops grow through changing seasons. They had prayed for enough water and favorable weather. Finally, after harvest,
the grain was gathered and stored. But harvested grain could not immediately become bread. First, it needed to be ground into flour. This process demanded patience. Large grinding stones were commonly used. Some households performed the work themselves. Others visited communal mills. The grinding process could take considerable time, especially for larger families. Once flour was available, the next stage began. Water was added. The ingredients were mixed together by hand. The dough slowly formed beneath skilled fingers. Years of experience taught people how the dough should feel. Too dry and the bread would become hard. Too wet and it would be difficult to bake properly. There were no measuring cups, no written recipes for most households. Knowledge passed from one generation to the next. Mothers taught daughters. Grandparents shared techniques learned decades earlier. The preparation itself became part of family tradition. After kneading came waiting.
The dough rested. Meanwhile, the oven needed preparation. Many Persian homes used clay ovens. Others relied on communal ovens shared by multiple families. Fuel was precious. Wood was not always abundant in many regions of Persia. Dried animal dung sometimes served as an alternative source of fuel. Though it may seem unusual today, it was practical and widely used. Eventually, the oven reached the proper temperature. The dough was shaped into flat rounds, each piece carefully stretched and prepared. Then came the most delicate moment, placing the bread inside the hot oven. Experience mattered. Timing mattered. A few extra moments could mean the difference between perfectly baked bread and a burnt meal. As the bread cooked, a familiar aroma spread through the air. Warm, comforting, inviting. The smell drifted through homes, courtyards, and village pathways. For many people, it signaled the beginning of another day. Fresh bread often accompanied nearly every meal. It carried vegetables, scooped up yogurt, held pieces of fruit, and helped make simple foods more filling. Bread was practical, versatile, reliable. In difficult years, however, even bread became uncertain. Poor harvests reduced grain supplies, drought damaged crops, prices increased. Families sometimes stretched their flour supplies by mixing different grains together. Every handful mattered. Every loaf represented valuable nourishment. Yet despite these challenges, bread remained a symbol of stability. A family with fresh bread on the table could face the day with greater confidence. The simple act of baking connected people to centuries of tradition. It connected villages to farms, farmers to merchants, and generations to one another. As morning activity spread across the village and the smell of bread slowly faded into the background, another concern remained on many people's minds: health. Because in medieval Persia, even a minor illness could become a serious threat.
For the people of medieval Persia, sickness was an unavoidable part of life. A small fever, a simple infection, a minor injury. Any one of these could become far more dangerous than most people today would imagine. Modern hospitals did not exist, antibiotics had not yet been discovered, and many treatments depended upon knowledge that was limited, incomplete, or sometimes entirely misunderstood. Yet despite these challenges, Persian physicians and healers worked tirelessly to understand the human body. Their world was filled with both wisdom and uncertainty.
For the ordinary people of medieval Persia, staying healthy was never guaranteed. A person could wake up feeling perfectly well in the morning and fall seriously ill only days later. What seems like a minor inconvenience today could become a life-changing event. A simple cut on the hand, a persistent cough, a fever that refused to go away. These problems often carried far greater risks than they do in the modern world. There were no pharmacies filled with medicines, no emergency rooms open through the night, no antibiotics waiting to stop dangerous infections. When sickness appeared, families often relied first on experience, tradition, and hope. Persia was home to many respected scholars and physicians. Some of the greatest medical minds of the medieval world lived and worked there. Their books traveled across continents. Their ideas influenced generations of healers. Yet even the most skilled physician faced limitations. Knowledge existed, but technology did not. Doctors could observe symptoms, they could recommend treatments, they could prepare herbal remedies, but many diseases remained mysterious. Patients often visited healers who used combinations of herbs, oils, and natural ingredients. Mint, saffron, rosewater, honey, and countless other plants were valued for their medicinal properties. Some remedies genuinely provided relief, others offered comfort more than cure. People placed great trust in traditional knowledge passed down through generations. Families carefully remembered which herbs helped with stomach problems, which mixtures soothed coughs, which plants reduced pain. This practical wisdom became an important part of everyday life. In villages far from major cities, professional physicians were not always available. A sick person might receive care from family members or local healers. Neighbors sometimes shared advice. Relatives prepared remedies. Entire communities often became involved when illness struck. Injuries were especially dangerous. Farmers worked with sharp tools. Craftsmen handled heavy equipment. Travelers faced accidents on rough roads. Even a small wound could become infected. Without effective treatments for bacterial infections, recovery was uncertain. Many people carried scars throughout their lives. Children faced particular risks. Illnesses that modern medicine now treats easily sometimes proved deadly. Parents worried constantly about fevers and childhood diseases. The loss of a child was a tragedy experienced by many families. Life expectancy was often much shorter than it is today. Seasonal illnesses brought additional challenges. Cold winters increased respiratory problems. Hot summers sometimes encouraged the spread of disease. Crowded towns and busy markets created opportunities for illnesses to move from person to person. People did their best to protect themselves. Clean water was valued, fresh air was appreciated, healthy foods were encouraged whenever possible, but understanding of disease remained limited. Many people simply did not know why sickness appeared. Religious faith often played an important role during times of illness. Families prayed for recovery, communities gathered to support those who were suffering. Hope became a powerful medicine of its own. Fortunately, not every illness was severe. Many people recovered naturally. The human body remained remarkably resilient, yet uncertainty was always present. A minor problem could suddenly become serious. And among all the health problems that troubled medieval Persians, few were more feared than one surprisingly common pain: a toothache. Because, in a world without modern dentistry, even a single bad tooth could cause weeks of misery.
For many people living in medieval Persia, few experiences were as dreaded as a toothache. The pain could begin quietly: a small discomfort while eating, a brief sting when drinking something cold. But over time, that discomfort could grow into something far more serious. And once it did, there were very few ways to stop it. For many people in medieval Persia, a toothache was not merely uncomfortable. It could become one of the most miserable experiences in daily life. At first, the pain often seemed small: a slight sensitivity while chewing bread, a brief ache after eating something sweet, such as dates or dried fruit. Perhaps only a minor annoyance, easy to ignore, easy to dismiss. But teeth rarely healed themselves, and without modern dentistry, small problems often became larger ones. As days passed, the pain could gradually worsen. The ache might appear only occasionally at first. Then it might begin returning every day.
Eventually, some people found themselves unable to think about anything else. The pain followed them everywhere, during work, during meals, even during sleep. A farmer working beneath the hot sun could still feel the throbbing inside his jaw. A merchant standing in a busy market could struggle to focus on customers. A mother caring for her family might continue her duties while silently enduring constant discomfort. Life did not pause because of a toothache. Responsibilities remained. Work continued. Yet every task became more difficult. Food often made the situation worse. Hard bread, nuts, and dried foods formed important parts of many Persian diets. These foods required considerable chewing. When a tooth became damaged, even ordinary meals could become painful. Some people began favoring softer foods. Others chewed only on one side of the mouth. Many simply endured the discomfort because there were few alternatives. Persian physicians understood that dental problems existed. They described tooth pain in medical writings and suggested various treatments. Herbal preparations sometimes helped reduce discomfort. Certain oils and plant-based remedies were applied to painful areas. Some treatments provided temporary relief. Others offered little improvement. When the pain became unbearable, more drastic solutions were considered. The most common answer was simple: remove the tooth. Yet this was far from pleasant. There were no modern anesthetics, no sterile dental clinics, no sophisticated instruments. Tooth extraction was often a frightening experience. People sometimes delayed treatment for as long as possible. Unfortunately, delaying could create new dangers. An infected tooth could cause swelling. The swelling could spread. Fever might develop. What began as a simple tooth problem could affect a person's entire health. This is one reason why dental pain was taken seriously, not because it was merely painful, but because it sometimes signaled something more dangerous. Despite these risks, many Persians learned to live with damaged teeth. The realities of daily life left little choice. People worked, raised families, managed farms, traveled long distances, all while carrying aches and pains that modern medicine would often treat quickly. Older individuals frequently experienced the greatest difficulties. Years of wear slowly affected their teeth. Missing teeth became common. Chewing certain foods became harder. Meals required more patience. Yet even then, life continued. Neighbors still gathered in markets. Families still shared meals. Stories still filled the evenings. People adapted as best they could, as they did with so many challenges. And while toothaches brought personal suffering, another difficulty affected nearly every family, regardless of age or health: the challenge of living together in small, crowded homes. When modern people imagine home, they often think of private bedrooms, separate living spaces, and plenty of room for personal belongings. For most ordinary Persians in the medieval period, life looked very different. Space was limited, privacy was rare, and entire families often shared homes that would seem surprisingly small by modern standards. When modern people think about home, they often imagine personal space, a bedroom of their own, a quiet corner to relax, a place where they can close a door and be alone for a while. For most ordinary people living in medieval Persia, such ideas would have seemed unusual. Life was shared. Almost everything was shared, including the home itself. Across villages and towns, many families lived in modest houses built from mud bricks. These homes were practical rather than luxurious. The thick walls helped keep out the intense summer heat and provided some warmth during cold winter nights. From the outside, many houses appeared simple, but inside they were filled with life.
A typical household often included several generations under one roof. Parents lived alongside their children. Grandparents frequently shared the same home. Sometimes uncles, aunts, cousins, or other relatives lived there as well. Family was not just important, it was essential. The household functioned as a team. Everyone contributed according to their abilities. The home itself usually revolved around a central courtyard. This open space became the heart of daily life. Children played there, meals were prepared there, clothes were washed and dried there. Conversations took place there. On pleasant evenings, family members gathered together beneath the open sky. The courtyard provided light, fresh air, and a sense of connection to the outside world. Rooms surrounding the courtyard often served multiple purposes. A space used for work during the day might become a sleeping area at night. Furniture was usually limited. People adapted their surroundings according to the needs of the moment. Sleeping arrangements reflected this flexibility. Many family members slept in shared spaces. Mats, blankets, and cushions were brought out in the evening and stored away during the day. Separate bedrooms for every individual were uncommon. Privacy existed, but it was far more limited than modern people are accustomed to. Family members constantly lived in close proximity to one another. They heard each other's conversations. They witnessed each other's daily routines. They shared joys and hardships together. This closeness sometimes created challenges. Arguments occurred, disagreements arose, crowded conditions could test patience. Yet these same conditions also strengthened family bonds. People rarely faced difficulties alone. When one became ill, relatives helped care for them. When work needed completion, many hands contributed. When celebrations occurred, everyone participated. The home became a place of cooperation and mutual support. Children grew up surrounded by relatives. They learned skills by watching older family members. Stories, traditions, and knowledge passed naturally from one generation to the next. A grandfather might share memories of distant travels. A grandmother might teach family recipes or household skills. These lessons required no books. They lived within the household itself. Life inside the home followed familiar rhythms. Morning brought activity and preparation. Afternoons often focused on work and responsibilities. Evenings allowed families to gather together once again. Meals became important social moments. Stories were exchanged, plans were discussed, the events of the day were shared. Outside the walls of the home, the wider world could feel uncertain. Harvests might fail, travel could be dangerous, weather could be unpredictable. But within the household, people found stability, support, belonging. Even in small homes with limited space, families created lives filled with meaning and connection. Yet, while home provided comfort, the world beyond the village presented new challenges. Traveling even short distances could be difficult. Roads were rough, journeys were slow, and every trip required patience.
For many people in medieval Persia, travel was not a casual activity. A journey to the next village might take hours. A trip to a distant town could require an entire day. Longer journeys sometimes lasted weeks or even months. The roads connecting Persia's communities were the lifelines of the country. Yet these roads were often far from comfortable. Dust, heat, rough terrain, and uncertainty accompanied almost every traveler. The simple act of moving from one place to another demanded preparation, endurance, and caution.
For most people in medieval Persia, travel was not something done for pleasure. There were no weekend excursions, no comfortable vehicles, no smooth highways stretching across the countryside.
A journey usually happened because it was necessary. Perhaps a farmer needed to visit a nearby market. Perhaps a merchant had goods to sell. Perhaps a family was attending a wedding, visiting relatives, or seeking help from a physician in a larger town. Whatever the reason, travel required effort. The roads that connected villages were often little more than worn paths created by generations of footsteps, animals, and carts. Some routes were well known and frequently used. Others crossed lonely stretches of countryside where travelers might walk for hours without seeing another person. In dry regions, dust became a constant companion. Each passing animal stirred clouds of fine earth into the air. A caravan of camels could leave a trail visible from far away. By the end of a long journey, clothes, shoes, and even faces might be covered with a thin layer of dust. The summer sun made travel even harder. During the hottest hours of the day, walking became exhausting. Travelers often planned their departures carefully. Many left before sunrise, taking advantage of the cooler morning air. Others rested during the afternoon and resumed their journey later. Water remained a constant concern. A person could survive hunger for some time, but without water, especially in Persia's dry climate, danger arrived quickly. Experienced travelers always paid close attention to wells, springs, and known water sources along their route. A missed opportunity to refill water containers could lead to serious difficulties later. Animals played a crucial role in transportation. Donkeys carried supplies between villages. Horses allowed faster movement for those who could afford them. Camels dominated longer journeys, especially across arid regions. Their ability to travel long distances with limited water made them invaluable companions. Many travelers developed strong relationships with their animals. A healthy camel or donkey could mean the difference between success and failure. The roads were not entirely empty. Throughout Persia, merchants, pilgrims, messengers, soldiers, and farmers all shared the same routes.
Travelers often exchanged greetings as they passed. News spread in this way. Stories traveled from village to village. Information moved slowly, carried by ordinary people walking dusty roads. A merchant might arrive with news from a distant city. A traveler might share stories about conditions elsewhere. In a world without newspapers, radios, or telephones, travelers helped connect communities. Yet journeys also carried risks. A twisted ankle on a remote road could become a serious problem. Unexpected weather might delay progress. Supplies could run low. And in some isolated areas, travelers worried about thieves and bandits. For this reason, people often preferred to travel in groups whenever possible. There was safety in numbers. A small caravan offered protection, companionship, and practical support. If one traveler faced difficulty, others could help. As evening approached, many travelers searched for a suitable place to rest. Some stayed with relatives. Others found shelter in villages. Long-distance travelers often relied on special resting places built along major routes. These structures offered food, water, protection, and a chance to recover before continuing onward. For weary travelers, they were among the most welcome sights in all of Persia. And for those crossing truly vast distances, the road eventually led to one of the most remarkable features of medieval Persian life, the great caravans that connected Persia to the wider world.
Imagine standing beside a road and watching a long line of camels appear on the horizon. Slowly they move closer. Each animal carries valuable goods from distant lands: silk, spices, carpets, precious metals, books, and countless other treasures. This was the world of the Persian caravan. For centuries, caravans connected cities, kingdoms, and entire civilizations. They transformed Persia into one of the great crossroads of the medieval world.
Imagine standing beside a dusty road somewhere in medieval Persia.
The morning sun has just begun to warm the landscape. The air is still calm. In the distance, a faint movement appears on the horizon. At first, it is difficult to see clearly. But slowly, a long line of shapes emerges from the shimmering light. A caravan is approaching. Dozens of camels move steadily forward. Their footsteps are slow and deliberate. Bundles of goods sway gently from their sides. Merchants walk alongside them. Guards keep watch. Drivers guide the animals with quiet commands. Together, they form one of the most familiar sights of the medieval Persian world. For centuries, caravans connected distant regions across Asia, the Middle East, and beyond. Long before trains, aeroplanes, or modern highways, these traveling groups carried goods, ideas, and information across enormous distances. Persia stood at the center of many of these routes. Its cities became important meeting points for merchants arriving from different corners of the known world. Some caravans traveled only a few days. Others spent weeks or even months on the road. A merchant leaving one city might not return home until an entire season had passed. The journey demanded patience. Every kilometer required effort. Every day brought new challenges. The camels themselves were essential. They were perfectly suited for long-distance travel across dry regions. Their strength allowed them to carry heavy loads. Their endurance helped them survive conditions that would exhaust many other animals. For travelers crossing deserts, camels were not merely useful, they were indispensable. A typical caravan carried an astonishing variety of goods. Fine silk from distant eastern lands, spices whose aromas filled market stores, beautiful carpets woven by skilled artisans, glassware, metalwork, books copied by hand,
jewelry crafted with remarkable care. Every item represented labor, skill, and value. Many merchants invested significant portions of their wealth in these goods. The success of a journey could determine a family's future. Yet caravan travel was rarely comfortable. The road stretched endlessly ahead. Days often began before sunrise. Travelers packed their belongings, checked supplies, and prepared the animals. Then they walked, hour after hour, day after day. The landscape changed slowly. Deserts gave way to valleys. Valleys led to mountains. Mountain passes opened toward new cities and villages. Along the way, travelers encountered people from many different cultures. Languages mixed, customs blended, stories spread. A merchant might share tea with someone from a distant kingdom. A traveler could hear news from lands he would never personally visit. Caravans carried more than merchandise. They carried knowledge, ideas, traditions, and sometimes even inventions. As evening approached, finding a safe place to rest became a priority. The open road offered little protection after dark. Animals needed food and water. People needed shelter. This is where one of Persia's most remarkable institutions became important, the caravanserai. These large roadside inns appeared along major trade routes. Built to serve travelers, they provided a secure place to spend the night. High walls surrounded spacious courtyards. Animals rested safely inside. Merchants stored valuable goods. Meals were prepared. Conversations filled the evening air. For weary travelers, the sight of a caravanserai after a long day on the road often brought immense relief. Within its walls, strangers became companions. News was exchanged. Business deals were discussed. Friendships sometimes began. The caravanserai served as both shelter and social center, a small world connected to the larger world beyond. Yet even these safe havens could not eliminate every danger. Beyond the walls waited deserts,
mountains, harsh weather, and occasional bandits. Every journey contained uncertainty. No merchant could know exactly what lay ahead. Still, the caravans continued, year after year, generation after generation. They crossed Persia's landscapes and connected distant civilizations. Their steady movement helped shape the history of the region. But among all the challenges they faced, none inspired more respect than the vast deserts themselves. Because once a caravan left the safety of towns and entered the open wilderness, survival became a far greater concern.
To people who had never seen it before, the Persian desert could appear beautiful. The endless horizon, the rolling dunes, the silence, the wide open sky. Yet experienced travellers knew that beneath this beauty lay many dangers. The desert rewarded preparation, but it punished mistakes. And even the smallest error could have serious consequences. To people who had never seen it before, the Persian desert could appear peaceful. Endless horizons stretched beneath a vast sky. Golden sand shimmered beneath the sunlight. The silence seemed almost magical. Yet experienced travelers knew the truth. The desert was beautiful, but it was never harmless. Every caravan leader understood that survival depended upon preparation. The desert rewarded caution and punished carelessness. A traveler who underestimated its dangers might never reach his destination. The greatest threat was often water, or rather, the lack of it. A person could walk for hours beneath the hot sun while feeling relatively comfortable. Then suddenly, thirst would begin to take hold. The mouth became dry, energy faded, thoughts grew slower. Every step required greater effort. In the open desert, water was life itself. This is why caravan leaders carefully planned every journey. They memorized wells. They knew where springs could be found. They understood the distances between safe stopping points. A single mistake could place dozens of people at risk. The sun created another challenge. During the hottest hours of the day, temperatures could become overwhelming. The air seemed to stand still. Heat radiated from the ground. Travelers often wrapped cloth around their heads and faces for protection. Even the camels moved more slowly. Whenever possible, caravans adjusted their schedules. They traveled during cooler hours and rested when conditions became too severe. Yet the desert could be deceptive. Far in the distance, travelers sometimes noticed what appeared to be water. A shining lake, a welcoming oasis, a place of relief. But as they moved closer, the water vanished. It had never existed at all. This phenomenon, known today as a mirage, confused countless travelers throughout history. The desert created illusions. The eyes saw things that were not really there. For inexperienced travelers, this could be deeply unsettling. Sandstorms presented another danger. Without warning, strong winds sometimes swept across the landscape. Dust and sand filled the air. Visibility disappeared. The horizon vanished. Even familiar routes became difficult to recognize. When this happened, caravans often stopped moving. People covered their faces. Animals were secured. Everyone waited for the storm to pass. Patience became the safest strategy. Night brought its own difficulties. Although temperatures became cooler, darkness created uncertainty. A traveler could lose the path. A misplaced step might cause injury. The open landscape looked very different beneath moonlight. Fortunately, experienced guides knew how to navigate using stars and landmarks. Their knowledge often determined whether a journey succeeded or failed. Wild animals occasionally created concern as well. Wolves, hyenas, and other predators lived in certain regions. Most avoided large groups of people. Yet travelers remained alert, especially when camping in remote areas. Perhaps the greatest challenge was isolation. Once a caravan entered the open desert,
Help was often far away. A broken wheel, a sick animal, an injured traveller.
Any problem became more serious when assistance could not easily be found. This reality encouraged cooperation. Members of a caravan depended upon one another. They shared supplies, they offered assistance, they solved problems together. In the desert, survival was rarely an individual achievement. It was a collective effort. Despite all these dangers, caravans continued crossing Persia year after year. Trade remained too important to stop. Merchants accepted the risks, travelers accepted the hardships, and gradually, through patience and determination, they reached distant destinations, sometimes after weeks of travel, sometimes after months. When they finally arrived, they entered places filled with activity, noise, and opportunity. The bustling markets of medieval Persia. Places where goods from across the known world came together. Places where stories, cultures, and fortunes met.
After a long day of travel, the caravan finally comes to a stop. The sun sinks below the horizon. The heat fades. A cool breeze begins to move across the desert. One by one, travelers prepare for the night. Camels kneel beside their loads. Small fires flicker in the darkness. And above them all, countless stars slowly appear. For many people traveling across medieval Persia, there was no roof overhead, no comfortable bed, only the open sky.
After a long day of travel, the caravan finally comes to a halt. The camels slowly kneel onto the sand. Bundles of goods are carefully unloaded. The sounds of footsteps gradually fade. The endless movement of the day comes to an end. For the travelers, this moment is always welcome. Hours of walking beneath the Persian sun have left everyone tired. The desert that felt harsh and unforgiving during the day now begins to reveal a gentler side. The western horizon glows with shades of gold, orange, and deep red. The last light of the sun slowly disappears. A cool breeze moves across the landscape. For a few moments, everything feels calm, peaceful, almost timeless. Small campfires soon begin to appear across the campsite. Travelers gather around them. Simple meals are prepared. Bread is shared. Dates and dried fruits pass from hand to hand. Water is carefully rationed. No one wastes a single drop. The desert has taught everyone the value of precious resources. As darkness settles fully over the land, the sky becomes extraordinary. Without cities or artificial lights, the stars shine with remarkable clarity. Thousands upon thousands of bright points fill the heavens. The Milky Way stretches across the sky like a river of light.
Many travelers pause simply to look upward. For centuries, these same stars guided merchants across Persia. The constellations served as familiar companions during lonely journeys. Experienced guides could navigate using little more than the night sky. The stars became maps, silent and reliable. Stories often filled the evening hours. Merchants shared tales from distant cities. Travelers described lands beyond the mountains. Some spoke of magnificent palaces,
Others recalled dangerous encounters on lonely roads. Young travelers listened carefully. Every story carried lessons. Every journey created new memories. The campfire became a place where knowledge passed from one person to another. As the night grew deeper, conversations gradually became quieter. One by one, travelers prepared to sleep. There were no luxury accommodations, no comfortable inns in the middle of the desert. Most simply spread blankets upon the ground. Some rested beside their animals. Others found shelter behind rocks or dunes that blocked the wind. Comfort was limited, yet exhaustion often made sleep come quickly. The desert itself created a unique silence. Unlike busy cities, there were few distractions. No crowded streets, no bustling markets, only the occasional sound of wind moving across the sand, the distant call of a night bird, the soft breathing of camels resting nearby. For many travelers, sleeping beneath the open sky became one of the most memorable parts of the journey. The vastness of the landscape inspired reflection. The stars reminded people how small they were compared to the world around them. In those quiet moments, far from villages and cities, life seemed simpler. Tomorrow would bring another day of travel, another stretch of road, another challenge to overcome. But for now, the caravan rested, beneath the same sky that had watched over Persia for countless generations. And while many travelers slept peacefully, they also understood a difficult truth. The road ahead remained uncertain. Because not every danger came from nature. Some dangers came from other people. Men who waited in remote places, watching the roads and searching for opportunities. Men known throughout Persia as bandits.
When travelers finally reached a Persian city after weeks on the road, one place always drew their attention. The market, the bazaar. A world of color, sound, and activity unlike anything found in the quiet desert. Here, merchants displayed goods from across the known world. Silks, spices, carpets, jewelry, books, and countless other treasures. For many visitors, entering a Persian bazaar felt like stepping into the very heart of medieval life. When travelers finally reached a Persian city after weeks on the road, one place always drew their attention. The market, the bazaar. A world of color, sound, and activity unlike anything found in the quiet desert. Here, merchants displayed goods from across the known world. Silks, spices, carpets, jewelry, books, and countless other treasures. For many visitors, entering a Persian bazaar felt like stepping into the very heart of medieval life. When travelers finally reached a Persian city, after days or even weeks on the road, one destination almost always awaited them: the bazaar. The market was far more than a place to buy and sell goods. It was the beating heart of the city, a place where merchants gathered, craftsmen worked, news spread, and daily life unfolded from sunrise until sunset. Long before a traveler could see the market itself, he might already hear it. Voices echoed through narrow streets, animals moved through crowded pathways, merchants called out to customers. The sounds blended together into a constant hum of activity. For someone arriving from the quiet desert, the contrast could feel overwhelming. The bazaar was alive. Everywhere a visitor looked, there was movement. Traders arranged their goods. Customers inspected merchandise. Porters carried heavy bundles through crowded lanes. Children followed parents through busy passageways. The market never seemed completely still. Persian bazaars were famous for their variety. One section might be filled with spices,
The air carried the rich aromas of cinnamon, saffron, and countless other seasonings. Another area displayed colorful textiles. Silks from distant lands hung beside locally woven fabrics. Elsewhere, skilled craftsmen shaped metal, carved wood, or created beautiful pottery. Each part of the market specialized in different goods. Visitors could spend hours exploring. Merchants arriving with caravans often brought products from distant regions. Some items had traveled thousands of kilometers before reaching the bazaar. Exotic goods fascinated customers. Stories about faraway lands accompanied many purchases. A simple piece of silk carried with it the memory of a long journey. A bag of spices connected the city to distant cultures. Negotiation formed an important part of market life. Prices were rarely fixed. Buyers and sellers discussed values carefully. Both sides expected conversation. Patience often led to better agreements. The process itself became a social interaction. Sometimes a purchase required only minutes, sometimes much longer. The bazaar also served as a center for information.
Travelers shared news from other cities. Merchants discussed political events. Visitors exchanged stories about road conditions, harvests, and distant markets. In a world without newspapers or modern communication, the bazaar helped keep communities informed. Food sellers added another layer of activity. Fresh bread filled the air with inviting aromas. Dates, nuts, fruits, and cooked meals attracted hungry customers. People gathered around food stalls, not only to eat, but also to socialize. Conversations flowed as freely as trade itself. For craftsmen, the market offered opportunity. A talented carpet maker might spend months creating a single masterpiece. A metal worker could dedicate years to perfecting his skills. The bazaar allowed these artisans to display their work and earn a living. Their products reflected generations of knowledge and tradition. As the afternoon passed, sunlight filtered through awnings and covered walkways. Shadows moved slowly across the crowded streets, yet the activity rarely slowed. The market remained busy until evening approached. Only then did merchants begin closing their stalls. Goods were secured. Animals were prepared for the night. The sounds gradually faded. The bustling bazaar slowly became quiet. Tomorrow the activity would begin again. Another day of trade. Another day of stories. Another day at the heart of Persian city life. But while the markets impressed visitors with their variety, many ordinary Persians spent their lives focused on something much simpler: the food that appeared on their tables each day. Because for most people, daily meals were modest, practical, and shaped by the realities of medieval life.
When people imagine ancient Persia, they often picture royal banquets filled with luxurious foods. Yet most Persians never experienced such feasts. The average farmer, craftsman, shepherd, or merchant lived very differently. Their meals were simple, practical, and closely connected to the seasons. What appeared on the table depended on the harvest, the weather, and the family's resources. For ordinary people, every meal told a story about daily life in medieval Persia. When people think about historical Persia, they often imagine lavish royal feasts, golden dishes, exotic spices, tables overflowing with food. Such meals certainly existed. Kings, nobles, and wealthy merchants sometimes enjoyed remarkable banquets. But for most ordinary Persians, daily life looked very different. The average farmer, shepherd, craftsman, or laborer relied on simple foods. Meals were designed to provide energy rather than luxury. People ate what the land could provide, what the season allowed, and what their household could afford. Bread remained the foundation of nearly every meal. In many homes, bread appeared on the table every single day. Without bread, a meal often felt incomplete. Families baked it regularly,
using wheat or barley flour whenever possible. Fresh bread was valued, but even stale bread was rarely wasted. Every piece had value. Alongside bread came dairy products. Goats and sheep provided milk. That milk often became yogurt, cheese, or other preserved foods. Yogurt was especially important because it could be stored longer than fresh milk. It also provided nourishment during hot weather. Many Persian families consumed yogurt almost daily. Vegetables played a major role as well.
Onions, cucumbers, herbs, beans, lentils, and various greens appeared in many meals. These foods were affordable and widely available. Families grew some of them in household gardens whenever space permitted. Others were purchased at local markets. Dates were another important food. In regions where date palms thrived, the fruit became a valuable source of energy. Easy to carry, easy to store, and naturally sweet. Travelers often packed dates for long journeys. Farmers carried them into the fields. Children enjoyed them as treats. Fruit varied according to region and season. Pomegranates, grapes, figs, melons, and apricots were popular whenever available. Fresh fruit brought welcome variety to daily meals. Yet because harvests occurred only during certain times of year, preservation was important. Drying fruits allowed families to enjoy them long after harvest season ended. Meat was less common than many modern people might expect. Most ordinary families did not eat meat every day. Animals represented wealth and practical resources. A goat could provide milk for years. A sheep produced wool. Slaughtering an animal was usually reserved for special occasions, religious celebrations, weddings, or important gatherings. When meat did appear on the table, it was often shared among many people. Meals were usually eaten together. Family members gathered around simple dishes. Bread often served as both food and utensil. People used pieces of bread to scoop up vegetables, yogurt, and stews. This practical method required no elaborate table settings. The meal became a shared experience, a moment of rest after long hours of work. Seasonal changes strongly influenced what people ate. Spring brought fresh produce. Summer offered fruits. Autumn delivered harvests. Winter depended heavily on stored supplies. Families constantly planned ahead. A poor harvest could affect meals for months. Food preservation became an essential skill. Dried fruits, stored grains, aged cheeses, these helped households survive difficult seasons. For travelers and merchants, food had to be practical. Dried foods dominated long journeys. Fresh ingredients spoiled too quickly. Every item carried on the road needed to justify its weight. As evening arrived and families gathered around their meals, the food might seem modest by modern standards, yet it represented something important: security, survival, and the hard work of countless people. Farmers who grew the crops, millers who ground the grain, bakers who prepared the bread, merchants who transported goods. Each meal connected an entire community, and behind every successful meal stood something equally important: the harvest itself, because when the harvest failed, life became much more difficult.
For the people of medieval Persia, patience was not simply a virtue. It was a necessity. A farmer could work for months without knowing whether his efforts would succeed. Seeds planted in spring might not produce results until much later. And between planting and harvest stood countless uncertainties: rain, heat, pests, disease, and simple bad luck. Every growing season became a test of endurance and hope. For the people of medieval Persia, patience was not simply a virtue, it was a necessity. A farmer could work for months without knowing whether his efforts would succeed. Seeds planted in spring might not produce results until much later. And between planting and harvest stood countless uncertainties: rain, heat, pests, disease, and simple bad luck. Every growing season became a test of endurance and hope. The agricultural year often began long before the first seed touched the soil. Fields needed preparation, tools required repair, animals had to be kept healthy and strong. Families discussed plans for the months ahead. Everyone understood the importance of the coming season. A successful harvest could provide food, income, and security. A poor harvest
could create hardship for an entire year. When the planting season arrived, farmers carefully scattered seeds across prepared fields. The work demanded experience. Too early, and the crops might suffer from unexpected weather. Too late, and the harvest might be reduced. Timing mattered. Every decision carried consequences. After planting came the most difficult part: waiting. The seeds disappeared beneath the soil. Days passed. Weeks passed.
At first, there was little visible change. Farmers visited their fields regularly. They examined the soil. They checked irrigation channels. They watched the sky, and they waited. Eventually, small green shoots began to appear. The first signs of life brought relief. Months of work suddenly felt worthwhile. Yet the danger had not passed. In many ways, it had only begun. Young crops were fragile. Too little water could damage them. Too much heat could weaken them. Strong winds sometimes caused problems. Insects occasionally threatened entire fields. Farmers constantly monitored conditions. Every morning brought new concerns. Every evening brought new hopes. The weather remained the greatest uncertainty. No farmer could control rainfall. No farmer could command the clouds. Some years brought ideal conditions. Others brought disappointment. A season that began with promise could end in frustration. Entire communities depended upon forces beyond human control. This reality encouraged humility. Nature always held the final authority. As the crops matured, anticipation grew. Fields gradually transformed into seas of golden grain. The sight filled farmers with cautious optimism. Yet even near harvest time, risks remained. A sudden storm could cause damage. Animals might enter fields. Disease could spread among crops. Nothing was guaranteed until the harvest was safely gathered. Finally, after months of waiting, harvest season arrived. Families entered the fields together. Neighbors often helped one another. The village became busy with activity. Grain was cut. Bundles were gathered. Storage areas filled. The hard work continued from sunrise until sunset. But unlike earlier labor, this effort brought immediate rewards. Each bundle represented success. Each wagon load represented survival. The harvest was more than an agricultural event. It was an emotional one. Relief replaced anxiety. Hope replaced uncertainty. For a brief moment, people could celebrate. The months of waiting had ended. The fields had fulfilled their promise. Yet not every year ended happily. Sometimes the harvest disappointed. Sometimes drought arrived. Sometimes nature offered less than people needed. And when that happened, entire communities faced one of the greatest challenges in medieval Persia: the struggle to survive during years of drought.
For people living in medieval Persia, few words inspired more concern than drought. A season without enough rain could change everything. Fields dried, wells dropped lower, harvests shrank, affected every part of life.
For people living in medieval Persia, few words inspired more concern than drought. A season without enough rain could change everything. Fields dried, wells dropped lower, harvests shrank, and families began to worry about the future. Because in a land where water was precious, the absence of rain affected every part of life. At first, the signs could be subtle. The rainy season arrived later than expected. Clouds appeared less often. Streams flowed more slowly. Farmers noticed the changes immediately. Years of experience had taught them how to read the landscape. They watched the sky carefully. They measured the water in wells. They discussed conditions with neighbors. Everyone hoped the situation would improve. Sometimes it did. Sometimes it did not. As the weeks passed, concern gradually turned into anxiety. The soil became harder and drier. Young crops struggled to grow.
Fields that should have appeared green remained dull and dusty. Animals searched longer for grazing land. The entire countryside seemed affected. Water became the center of every conversation. Families began using it more carefully. A jar that might once have been used freely was now guarded closely. Every drop mattered. Children learned to avoid waste. Adults planned their daily activities around available supplies. The simple act of filling a water container became increasingly important. Farmers faced especially difficult decisions. Should they use precious water on one field or another? Which crops had the best chance of survival? How much water could be spared for livestock? There were rarely easy answers. Every choice involved risk. As conditions worsened, wells sometimes dropped to alarming levels. Villagers gathered around them with concern. Some wells that had supplied communities for generations produced less water than before. Others dried up completely. When that happened, families often traveled further in search of reliable sources. Tasks that once took minutes could require hours. Food shortages frequently followed drought. Smaller harvests meant less grain. Less grain meant higher prices. Markets reflected the problem quickly. Basic foods became more expensive. Poor families felt the effects first. What had once been affordable suddenly became difficult to obtain.
Many households reduced portions. Meals became simpler. People adapted as best they could. Animals also suffered. Sheep, goats, and donkeys depended upon vegetation that was now disappearing. Some families were forced to sell animals before conditions grew worse. Others watched helplessly as their herds weakened. The loss of livestock represented more than emotional hardship. It threatened future income and survival. Communities often responded by working together. Neighbors shared information. Families supported one another. Those with slightly better resources sometimes helped those facing greater difficulties. Cooperation became essential. No one could control the weather, but people could support each other. Religious gatherings often became more important during drought years. People prayed for rain. They hoped for relief. The uncertainty of nature reminded everyone how dependent they were upon forces beyond their control. Months could pass before meaningful rain finally arrived. When dark clouds eventually appeared on the horizon, entire villages watched with anticipation. The first drops of rain brought relief. The sound of water striking dry earth felt almost miraculous. Children smiled. Farmers looked toward the sky with gratitude. Hope slowly returned. Yet even after the drought ended, recovery took time. Fields needed rebuilding. Animals needed care. Food supplies needed replenishing. The effects of a difficult year could linger long afterward. For the people of medieval Persia, drought was not simply a weather event. It was a test of resilience. A reminder that survival often depended upon patience, cooperation, and determination. And while nature created many hardships, another burden came not from the sky but from human rulers: taxes. Because no matter how difficult life became, most people were still expected to pay what they owed.
For the ordinary people of medieval Persia, life involved many obligations. Some came from nature, others came from society, and among the most important were taxes. Whether a person was a farmer, merchant, craftsman, or livestock owner, part of their labor often belonged to someone else. Kings, governors, local officials, and landowners all depended upon taxes to support their authority. For ordinary families, these payments could sometimes feel heavy indeed. As difficult as farming could be in medieval Persia, growing food was only part of the challenge. Keeping it was another matter entirely. After months of labor beneath the sun, after planting, watering, protecting, and harvesting crops, many families knew that not everything they produced would remain in their possession. A portion would be claimed as tax. For ordinary villagers, taxes were simply a fact of life. They were as familiar as the changing seasons. People might complain about them, they might worry about them, but they could rarely avoid them. Throughout medieval Persia, rulers depended on taxes to support governments, armies, public works, and administrative systems.
Officials needed payment, roads required maintenance, soldiers needed food and equipment. The state relied upon resources collected from the population. In principle, this system helped maintain order. In practice, the experience could feel very different for ordinary people. Most farmers paid taxes based on their harvests. The amount varied depending on location, time period, and local authorities. Some years the burden felt manageable. Other years it felt overwhelming, particularly after poor harvests. Imagine spending months cultivating a field, only to discover that drought had reduced the yield. The family already had less grain than expected, yet taxes still had to be paid. The pressure could become intense. For many households, this created constant anxiety. A successful harvest brought relief, not only because there was food to eat. It meant taxes could be paid without threatening the family's survival. A poor harvest forced difficult decisions. How much grain should be saved? How much could be surrendered? Would enough remain for the coming months? These questions occupied many minds. Tax collection often involved local officials who traveled between villages. Their arrival could generate mixed feelings. Some villages greeted them politely. Others watched with concern. Everyone understood why they had come. Records were examined. Payments were calculated. Goods were collected. Sometimes taxes were paid in coin. Often they were paid in agricultural products, grain, livestock, fruit, or other valuable resources. For people who possessed little wealth, even a modest payment could represent significant sacrifice. The burden was not always equal. Wealthier landowners generally had greater resources and flexibility. Poor farmers often felt the pressure more directly. A difficult season affected them immediately.
A small setback could create serious hardship. Despite this, most people continued fulfilling their obligations. Refusing to pay taxes was risky. Authorities possessed considerable power. Maintaining a good relationship with local officials often seemed the safer choice. Yet taxes were not the only form of obligation. Some communities also provided labor for public projects. Villagers might help repair roads, maintain irrigation systems, transport supplies, or support other local needs. These responsibilities consumed valuable time and energy. Days spent working on public projects were days not spent tending personal fields. Nevertheless, many of these projects benefited the community as a whole. Irrigation canals improved harvests. Roads supported trade. Public works helped villages function more effectively. The relationship between taxes and daily life was therefore complicated. People resented heavy burdens, yet they also relied on many of the systems those payments supported. As evenings settled over the countryside, farmers often gathered with family members and neighbors. They discussed harvests, weather, market prices, and occasionally taxes. These conversations reflected a simple truth. Life in medieval Persia demanded careful balance. Families worked hard to produce enough for themselves while meeting the expectations of those who governed them. It was another challenge among many, another responsibility woven into everyday life. And while farmers worked the land, another group of people spent their days creating valuable goods with their hands, the craftsmen whose skills filled Persia's markets with remarkable products.
Not everyone in medieval Persia worked in the fields. Beyond the farms and villages, skilled craftsmen spent countless hours creating objects that people used every day. From carpets and pottery to metalwork and textiles, their labor helped shape the economy and culture of Persian society. Their work required patience, precision, and years of practice. For many craftsmen, mastery took a lifetime.
Not everyone in medieval Persia spent their days working in fields. While farmers produced the food that sustained society, craftsmen created many of the goods that people relied upon every day. Their workshops filled cities, towns, and marketplaces with activity. The sound of hammers striking metal, the steady turning of pottery wheels, the rhythm of looms weaving cloth. These sounds formed an important part of daily life. Craftsmanship required skill, and skill required years of learning. Many craftsmen began training when they were still children. A young apprentice might spend years observing an experienced master. At first, the tasks were simple: cleaning tools, organizing materials, running errands. Gradually, more responsibility followed. Over time, knowledge passed from one generation to the next. Patience was essential. A beautiful object could not be rushed. A poorly made product damaged a craftsman's reputation. Quality mattered. Customers noticed the difference. Persian cities became famous for their skilled artisans. Metalworkers shaped tools, cooking vessels, lamps, and decorative objects. Potters transformed ordinary clay into useful containers. Woodworkers created furniture, doors, and storage chests. Leatherworkers produced shoes, belts, and saddles. Each trade required specialized knowledge. Each contributed something valuable to society. The workshop itself often became a second home. Many craftsmen spent long hours there. Morning sunlight entered through small windows. Tools hung neatly along walls. Materials waited patiently to be transformed.
Day after day, craftsmen repeated familiar motions: cutting, shaping, polishing, repairing, creating. The work could be demanding. Hands developed calluses, eyes strained during detailed tasks, backs ached after hours of concentration. Yet many artisans took pride in their abilities. Their skills allowed them to earn a living and support their families. Markets provided opportunities to sell finished products. Customers examined items carefully. They looked for quality craftsmanship, strong materials, careful workmanship. A craftsman's reputation often determined success. Satisfied customers returned. Disappointed customers looked elsewhere. Competition existed, but so did cooperation. Craftsmen frequently lived and worked near others in the same profession. Knowledge spread through conversation and observation. Techniques improved over time. Communities of artisans helped preserve valuable traditions. Some products remained local, others traveled remarkable distances. A well-made object created in Persia might eventually reach a distant kingdom, hundreds or even thousands of kilometers away. Through trade, Persian craftsmanship became known across much of the medieval world. Among all these crafts, however, one stood above the rest in fame and admiration: the art of carpet making, a tradition that demanded extraordinary patience and remarkable skill.
Among the many products created in medieval Persia, few became as famous as Persian carpets. Today, people around the world recognize them for their beauty, but behind every carpet lay countless hours of labor. The finished result might appear effortless. The process was anything but easy. Creating a carpet by hand required patience on a scale that modern people often find difficult to imagine. The work usually began with wool. Sheep provided much of the raw material. After shearing, the wool needed cleaning and preparation. Only then could it be spun into thread. This alone required considerable effort. Next came dyeing. Persian artisans used natural dyes obtained from plants, minerals, and insects. Different ingredients produced different colors: deep reds, rich blues, soft yellows, earthy browns. Each color demanded careful preparation. The dyeing process was both an art and a science. Consistency mattered. A small mistake could change the final appearance of the carpet. Once the threads were ready, weaving could begin. Large wooden looms stood inside workshops and homes.
The framework held hundreds of threads in place. The weaver sat before the loom and worked knot by knot.
One knot, then another, and another. Thousands upon thousands of knots gradually formed intricate patterns. Days became weeks, weeks became months. For larger carpets, years of work were sometimes required. The process demanded concentration. A moment of distraction could lead to mistakes. Patterns had to remain precise. Colours had to appear in exactly the right places. Many designs carried deep cultural meaning. Flowers, geometric shapes, garden motifs, symbols passed through generations. Each carpet told a story through its design. Families often participated together. Several people might work on the same carpet. Older weavers taught younger ones. Skills passed naturally from one generation to the next. The workshop became a place of learning as well as production. As the carpet slowly grew, the finished sections were rolled downward. The completed design emerged little by little. Months of effort gradually became visible. For merchants, these carpets represented valuable trade goods. For families, they represented income. For artisans, they represented pride. A well-made carpet could become known far beyond the village where it was created. Travelers carried them across trade routes. Merchants sold them in distant cities. Persian carpets became symbols of quality and craftsmanship. Yet the people who created them often lived modest lives. Their fame belonged to the product, not the maker. They worked patiently behind the scenes, knot after knot, thread after thread, creating something beautiful through persistence and skill. And once completed, many of these carpets began a long journey through one of the world's most important trade networks, the Silk Road. Long before modern highways, railways, or cargo ships connected continents, another network linked much of the known world. It was called the Silk Road, and Persia stood at its very heart. Long before modern highways, railways, or cargo ships connected continents, another network linked much of the known world. It was called the Silk Road, and Persia stood at its very heart. The Silk Road was not a single road. It was a vast web of routes stretching across deserts, mountains, valleys, and cities. These routes connected East Asia, Central Asia, Persia, the Middle East, and even parts of Europe. Through them traveled merchants, travelers, scholars, pilgrims, diplomats, and adventurers. Goods moved across immense distances, but so did ideas. For people living near these trade routes, life often felt very different from life in isolated villages. The world seemed larger, more connected, more diverse. A merchant arriving from the east might bring silk from China. Another traveler could carry spices from India. A caravan from the west might arrive with glassware, metals, or fine textiles. Markets became places where distant worlds met. The cities of Persia benefited greatly from this trade. Busy marketplaces filled with activity from sunrise until sunset. Different languages echoed through the streets. Strangers from distant lands exchanged greetings. Negotiations took place beneath shaded arcades.
Every arrival brought something new. A new product, a new story, a new piece of information. For local residents, these visitors were often fascinating. Children watched caravans enter the city gates. Craftsmen examined unfamiliar goods. Merchants searched for profitable opportunities. Travelers shared stories of distant kingdoms that most people would never see themselves.
The Silk Road transformed Persia into a crossroads of cultures. Yet life along the trade routes was not always glamorous. The merchants who travelled them endured enormous hardships. Months away from home, harsh weather,
Difficult terrain, constant uncertainty. Every successful journey represented tremendous effort. Caravanserais became essential parts of this system. Located along major routes, these fortified inns offered shelter to travellers. Within their walls, merchants could rest safely. Animals received food and water. Goods were protected. News spread quickly among travellers gathered around evening fires. Some caravanserais resembled small communities. People from different backgrounds shared meals and exchanged experiences. The atmosphere could be surprisingly lively. Yet despite all this activity, danger remained nearby. Bandits sometimes targeted wealthy caravans. Natural obstacles delayed progress. Illness could strike without warning. A merchant never knew exactly what challenges awaited beyond the next horizon. Still, the rewards encouraged people to continue. Successful trade brought wealth. Cities prospered. Artisans found customers. Farmers found markets. Entire regions benefited from the movement of goods. The Silk Road became more than a collection of routes. It became a lifeline connecting civilizations. A bridge between distant peoples. A pathway through which knowledge, technology, and culture traveled. For many ordinary Persians, the Silk Road represented opportunity. But for the merchants who spent their lives traveling it, the road itself became home. Their journeys never truly ended. One destination simply led to another. And behind every successful trade route stood countless individuals willing to spend weeks, months, and sometimes years on the move. People whose lives were defined by travel. The merchants of medieval Persia.
For most people in medieval Persia, home remained the center of life. Families stayed close to familiar fields, neighborhoods, and communities. Merchants lived differently. Their world was constantly changing. A successful merchant might spend more time on the road than at home. Weeks could pass without seeing family. Months might separate one visit from the next. The journey itself became part of daily life. Many merchants began preparing long before departure. Goods needed inspection. Animals required care. Supplies had to be gathered. Routes were planned carefully. Every journey involved risk, and careful preparation improved the chances of success. At dawn, caravans slowly left city gates. The familiar sights of home gradually disappeared behind them. Ahead stretched roads leading toward distant markets and unfamiliar lands. Some merchants traveled hundreds of kilometers. Others traveled thousands. The farther they went, the greater both the risks and the rewards. A merchant's success depended upon knowledge. Knowing where prices were high. Knowing where certain goods were scarce. Knowing which roads were safe and which should be avoided. Information was often as valuable as merchandise itself. Experienced merchants built networks of contacts across multiple cities. Friends, business partners, and trusted associates helped them navigate an unpredictable world. Along the road, patience became essential. Travel was slow. A caravan moved only as fast as its animals. Unexpected delays were common. A storm, a damaged wagon, a sick camel, a flooded river crossing. Any of these could disrupt carefully made plans. Yet merchants learned to adapt. Flexibility became part of the profession. The road also exposed travelers to many different cultures. Languages changed from region to region. Customs varied. Foods tasted different. Clothing styles shifted. Merchants became observers of the wider world.
Many developed a broader understanding of distant places than most people of their time. Evenings often brought moments of reflection. After a long day of travel, merchants gathered around campfires or rested inside caravanserai.
They discussed business, shared stories, exchanged news. These conversations helped spread information across enormous distances. A rumor heard in one city might reach another weeks later through traveling merchants. In many ways, they served as the communication network of the medieval world. Yet, despite occasional successes and profitable deals, the life of a merchant was rarely easy. Loneliness accompanied many journeys. Families remained far away. Comforts were limited. The road demanded endurance. Even prosperous merchants faced uncertainty. A single disaster could destroy months of work. A lost caravan, a poor market, a robbery, an unexpected conflict between rulers. Any of these could threaten a merchant's livelihood. Still, generation after generation continued to travel. The opportunities outweighed the risks. Trade connected people, supported cities, and helped shape the history of Persia itself. But moving information across the country remained a challenge. Without modern communication, how did news travel from one region to another? The answer depended upon travelers, merchants, messengers, and the slow movement of people along Persia's roads.
In the modern world, news can cross the globe in seconds. In medieval Persia, it traveled at the speed of a horse, a camel, or a walking traveler. And sometimes it traveled even slower.
In the modern world, news can cross the globe in seconds. In medieval Persia, it traveled at the speed of a horse, a camel, or a walking traveler. And sometimes it traveled even slower. For ordinary people, information was precious. A message from a neighboring town, news of a successful harvest, reports of a distant conflict, announcements from rulers, all of these mattered. Yet obtaining reliable information was often difficult. Most villages were isolated by modern standards. People spent much of their lives close to home. Many never traveled far beyond their local region. As a result, news usually arrived through visitors. Travelers carried stories, merchants carried rumors, pilgrims carried observations, messengers carried official announcements. Every arrival brought the possibility of learning something new. A merchant entering a village market often attracted attention, not only because of the goods he carried, but because of the information he possessed. People gathered around. Questions followed. What had he seen? Which roads were safe? How were conditions in nearby cities? Had prices risen or fallen? Were there any important developments elsewhere? In a world without newspapers, conversations served as a primary source of information. Caravanserais played an important role in this process. Travelers from different regions met there. News spread naturally through discussion. One person shared what they had heard. Another added new details. Stories moved from caravan to caravan, city to city, region to region.
Not every story remained accurate. Rumors often changed as they traveled. Details were forgotten. Facts became exaggerated. Misunderstandings occurred. A small event in one town might become a dramatic tale by the time it reached another. People learned to evaluate information carefully. Trustworthy sources were highly valued. Official communication worked differently. Governments relied upon messengers to carry important announcements. Skilled riders sometimes covered impressive distances. They delivered orders, reports, and official correspondence between cities and administrative centers. The speed of communication often depended upon the condition of roads and the urgency of the message. Weather could cause delays. Distance always created challenges.
For rulers, this presented a constant problem. Managing a large territory became more difficult when information moved slowly. A decision made in one city might take weeks to affect another. Events sometimes unfolded faster than messages could travel. Ordinary villagers experienced this reality in everyday life. Important news might arrive days or weeks after the event itself. People became accustomed to uncertainty. Patience was simply part of life. Yet despite these limitations, information continued to move. Trade routes connected communities. Travelers shared experiences. Stories linked distant places together. Knowledge spread slowly, but it spread nonetheless. The Persian world remained connected through countless conversations occurring across roads, markets, inns, and villages. And while news helped people understand the world around them, few events captured public attention more than the arrival of a great market day. Because markets were far more than places to buy and sell. They were the social heart of medieval Persian life.
For many people in medieval Persia, Market Day was one of the most important events of the week. It was a chance to buy necessities, sell goods, meet friends, exchange news, and briefly escape the routines of everyday life. Long before sunrise, activity began. Merchants prepared their stalls, farmers loaded animals with produce, craftsmen gathered items they hoped to sell. Everyone moved with purpose. The market would soon come alive. As morning arrived, the bazaar filled with energy. Narrow streets and covered walkways buzzed with conversation. People moved in every direction. Voices echoed beneath archways. Animals carried supplies through crowded passages. The air itself seemed alive. Every section of the market offered something different. One area displayed fruits and vegetables, another specialized in grain and bread. Elsewhere, craftsmen sold pottery, tools, carpets, and textiles. The variety amazed visitors. Colors, smells, and sounds blended together into a unique experience. For many villages, the bazaar offered access to goods unavailable at home. A farmer might purchase tools, a family might buy cloth, a merchant might search for products to trade elsewhere. The market connected producers and consumers. It linked villages with cities. Negotiation formed an important part of every transaction. Prices were rarely fixed. Buyers and sellers discussed value.
Offers were made. Counter-offers followed. Experienced merchants developed strong bargaining skills. The process could take time, yet many people enjoyed it. Successful negotiation brought satisfaction to both sides. Food vendors attracted constant attention. Fresh bread, dates, nuts, spices, sweet treats. The aromas drifted through the market air. Hungry travelers often paused for a meal before continuing their journeys. The bazaar also served an important social function. Friends met unexpectedly. Families exchanged greetings. Neighbors discussed recent events. Travelers shared stories from distant places. For a few hours, the marketplace became the center of community life. Children often found the experience especially exciting. New sights appeared everywhere. Performers occasionally entertained crowds. Animals from distant regions attracted curiosity. The market felt larger than life. Yet beneath the activity lay countless hours of labor. Every product represented someone's hard work. Farmers cultivated crops. Artisans crafted goods. Merchants transported supplies across long distances. The bazaar brought all these efforts together. As afternoon faded toward evening, activity gradually slowed. Stalls closed. Animals were loaded once again. People returned home carrying purchases, profits, and stories. The market day ended, but its effects continued. Goods spread throughout the community. Information traveled with returning visitors. Relationships strengthened through countless interactions. The bazaar remained one of the most important institutions in Persian society. a place where commerce and community met. And among all the people who visited these markets, few attracted more admiration than the scholars who dedicated their lives to learning. While farmers worked the fields and merchants traveled the roads, another group shaped medieval Persia in a very different way. They devoted themselves to knowledge, books, learning, and discovery.
While farmers worked the fields and merchants traveled the roads, another group shaped medieval Persia in a very different way. They devoted themselves to knowledge, books, learning, and discovery. For many ordinary people, daily life revolved around survival. Food had to be grown, water had to be collected, families had to be supported. Yet within Persia's great cities, scholars spent countless hours studying subjects that ranged from medicine and mathematics to astronomy and philosophy. Their work would influence generations far beyond their own lifetimes. Learning held a respected place in Persian society. Families who could afford it often encouraged education. Students traveled long distances to study with respected teachers. Knowledge was seen not merely as useful, it was valuable in its own right. The process of learning required patience. Books were precious possessions. Unlike modern printed volumes, every manuscript had to be copied by hand. A single book might require weeks or months of careful work. Scribes sat for long hours reproducing texts with remarkable precision. Every page demanded concentration. Every line required attention. Mistakes could not be corrected easily. As a result, books remained expensive and highly valued. Libraries became treasures of knowledge. Some contained works gathered from many different regions. Shelves held manuscripts on medicine, history, mathematics, geography, literature, and religion. Students and scholars spent countless hours studying these collections.
The library offered access to ideas accumulated over centuries. Within these quiet spaces, learning flourished. A visitor might see scholars reading beneath the soft light of oil lamps. Others discussed difficult questions. Some copied manuscripts, others wrote entirely new works. The atmosphere was calm, focused, thoughtful. Persian scholars became especially known for their contributions to science and medicine. They observed the natural world carefully. They recorded their findings. They preserved ancient knowledge while also expanding it. Many of their writings later traveled across continents and influenced scholars elsewhere. Astronomy fascinated many students. The night skies above Persia offered ideal opportunities for observation. Scholars studied stars and planets. They calculated movements. They developed increasingly sophisticated understanding of the heavens. Their observations helped improve calendars and navigation. Mathematics also received significant attention. Numbers, measurements, and calculations played important roles in commerce, engineering, and science. Students devoted years to mastering these subjects. Learning was rarely easy. Progress came slowly, but persistence often brought rewards. The pursuit of knowledge demanded discipline, hours of reading, careful note-taking, endless discussion. Yet many scholars found great satisfaction in the process. For them, understanding the world was a lifelong journey. Even ordinary people benefited indirectly from scholarly work. Improved medical knowledge helped physicians. Advances in engineering supported irrigation systems. Better calculations assisted merchants and builders. Knowledge spread outward through society. Its effects reached far beyond libraries and classrooms. As evening arrived, students sometimes continued studying by lamplight.
pages turned quietly. Pens moved across parchment. Ideas passed from teacher to student, generation after generation. In this way, Persia became one of the great centers of learning in the medieval world. Yet, while scholars studied books and ideas, many ordinary children experienced a very different reality. Most began working long before adulthood, and childhood itself looked very different from what we imagine today.
For children growing up in medieval Persia, life was rarely carefree. There were games, there were friendships, there were moments of joy, but there were also responsibilities, many responsibilities. From a young age, children became active members of their households. They helped their families survive. A modern visitor might be surprised by how early these duties began. Even young children often contributed in small ways. They carried water, gathered firewood, watched younger siblings, helped care for animals, assisted with household chores. As they grew older, responsibilities increased. Boys frequently learned farming, trade, or craft skills from fathers and relatives. Girls often learned household management, food preparation, weaving, and other practical tasks from mothers and grandmothers. Education varied greatly. Some children received formal instruction, many did not. The opportunities available often depended on family circumstances and location. In cities, access to teachers and learning centers was generally greater. In rural areas, practical skills often took priority. For most families, survival came first. Children learned by observing adults, watching, imitating, practicing. Knowledge passed naturally from one generation to the next. The household itself became a classroom. Games still existed. Children found ways to entertain themselves with simple objects and imagination.
They raced through village streets, played with handmade toys, invented competitions, laughed with friends. These moments offered relief from daily work. Yet childhood remained closely connected to adulthood. Young people prepared for future responsibilities from an early age. They understood the importance of contributing to the family. Life moved quickly. A child helping with simple chores today might soon take on far greater duties. Families depended upon everyone. The work of children mattered. Their efforts supported parents, siblings, and grandparents alike. Growing up in medieval Persia required maturity, patience, and resilience. Children learned lessons that modern people often encounter much later in life. Yet, despite the challenges, strong family bonds provided guidance and support. Parents taught practical skills. Grandparents shared stories and wisdom. Communities helped shape the next generation. In this way, childhood became a preparation for the realities of adult life. And among those realities, few events carried more importance than marriage, because marriage did not simply unite two individuals. It connected families, responsibilities, and entire communities.
For most people in medieval Persia, marriage marked one of life's most important transitions. It was not only a personal relationship, it was also a social and family institution that shaped the future of entire households. For most people in medieval Persia, marriage marked one of life's most important transitions. It was not only a personal relationship, it was also a social and family institution that shaped the future of entire households. Marriage connected families together, created new responsibilities, and helped ensure the continuation of communities. Unlike the modern world, marriage was often viewed as a matter involving entire families rather than only two individuals. Parents and relatives frequently played important roles in arranging introductions and discussions.
Practical considerations mattered greatly: family reputation, economic stability, community ties, all influenced decisions. For young men and women, marriage often represented the beginning of a new stage of life. New duties arrived, new expectations followed, and with them came opportunities as well as challenges. Wedding celebrations varied according to wealth and local traditions. Some were modest, others were elaborate. Family members gathered, friends offered congratulations, food was shared, music and festivities filled the air. For a brief time, daily hardships gave way to celebration. These occasions strengthened social bonds throughout the community. After the wedding, everyday life resumed. The realities of marriage quickly became apparent. A household required constant work. Food had to be prepared, water collected, children cared for, resources managed carefully. Success depended upon cooperation. Many couples lived close to extended family members. Parents, grandparents, and relatives often remained important parts of daily life. Support networks helped households navigate challenges. Advice flowed between generations. Experience became a valuable resource. Children occupied a central place within family life. Their arrival brought joy, but also responsibility. Parents worked hard to provide food, shelter, and guidance. Every child represented both hope for the future and an additional obligation in the present. Life expectancy was lower than today. Illnesses remained common. Uncertainty touched many families. As a result, strong family relationships became especially important. People relied upon one another. Difficulties were faced together. Older family members often held respected positions within the household. Grandparents shared stories, offered advice, passed on traditions. Their experience helped guide younger generations. Family life was rarely perfect. Disagreements occurred. Resources could become strained. Crowded living conditions sometimes created tension. Yet family remained one of the most reliable sources of support available. For many people, it provided security in an uncertain world. As years passed, families celebrated births, weddings, and other milestones together. They also faced hardships together: droughts, illnesses, economic difficulties. The household became a place where both joy and sorrow were shared. Through these experiences, family bonds grew stronger. They connected generations across time, linked the past with the future, and provided stability amid the challenges of medieval life. Yet even the strongest families could not escape one reality that touched every community: death. Because in medieval Persia, people encountered mortality far more frequently than most modern individuals do today.
For the people of medieval Persia, death was not a distant concept. It was a familiar part of life. Most individuals experience the loss of relatives, friends, neighbors, and community members throughout their lives. Life expectancy was shorter, disease was common, accidents occurred, and medical treatments remained limited. As a result, death occupied a more visible place in society than it does in many modern communities. Families understood from an early age that life could be unpredictable. A harsh winter, a dangerous illness, a difficult childbirth, any of these might change a family's future. Yet despite this uncertainty, people continued living with resilience and purpose. Religious faith often provided comfort during times of grief. Communities gathered to support those who had suffered loss. Neighbors offered assistance. Relatives traveled to be present. No family was expected to face sorrow completely alone. Funeral customs reflected both respect for the deceased and concern for the living. Ceremonies helped communities express grief. They provided opportunities to remember lives that had ended, and they reminded everyone of the importance of family, faith, and community. The experience of loss often strengthens social bonds. People became more aware of how much they depended upon one another. Daily life continued. Fields still required attention. Markets still opened.
Children still played, yet moments of remembrance remained important. Stories preserved memories, families recalled the wisdom of elders, communities honored those who had contributed to shared life. For many people, the awareness of mortality encouraged appreciation for ordinary moments: a family meal, a conversation with friends, a peaceful evening beneath the stars. These experiences gained value because life itself was uncertain. Death was understood as part of the natural cycle of existence, something inevitable, something universal. Kings faced it, farmers faced it, merchants, craftsmen, scholars, and shepherds all shared the same human destiny. This understanding shaped perspectives on life.
People worked hard, built families, created traditions, and contributed to their communities because they knew their time was limited. Yet despite all the hardships we have explored, heat, drought, taxes, illness, travel, and uncertainty, medieval Persians continued to build remarkable lives, and to understand why, we must look at the resilience that allowed them to endure.
When modern people imagine medieval life, it is easy to focus only on the hardships, and certainly there were many: the struggle for water, the uncertainty of harvests, the dangers of illness, the burden of taxes, the challenges of travel. Yet these difficulties tell only part of the story, because despite everything, millions of people continued to live, work, learn, trade, raise families, and build communities.
When modern people imagine medieval life, it is easy to focus only on the hardships, and certainly there were many: the struggle for water, the uncertainty of harvests, the dangers of illness, the burden of taxes, the challenges of travel. Yet these difficulties tell only part of the story, because despite everything, millions of people continued to live, work, learn, trade, raise families, and build communities. How was this possible? Part of the answer lies in resilience. Medieval Persians grew up understanding that life would not always be easy. Hardship was expected. Challenges were normal. People learned from childhood how to adapt, how to conserve resources, how to solve problems, and how to support one another. Communities played an important role. Neighbors helped neighbors, families worked together, villages shared responsibilities. When drought struck, people cooperated. When illness appeared, relatives provided care. When harvest succeeded, communities celebrated together. No one survived entirely alone. Faith also provided strength. Religious beliefs offered comfort during difficult times. People found meaning in hardship, hope during uncertainty, and reassurance during periods of loss. These beliefs helped many individuals endure circumstances that might otherwise have felt overwhelming. Knowledge contributed as well. Generations passed practical skills to one another. Farmers understood irrigation. Craftsmen mastered specialized trades. Merchants learned the routes of distant markets. Families preserved traditions that improved survival. This accumulated knowledge became a powerful resource.
Perhaps most importantly, people adapted their expectations. They did not compare their lives to a future world filled with electricity, modern medicine, and instant communication. They worked within the realities they knew. And within those realities, many found happiness: friendships, family gatherings, festivals, stories shared beneath the stars. Simple moments often carry deep meaning. The people of medieval Persia were not constantly miserable. They experienced joy as well as hardship, success as well as struggle, hope alongside uncertainty. Their lives were complex, human, and remarkably resilient. Yet endurance alone did not define Persian society, because throughout the year, moments arrived when ordinary work paused, when villages and cities came alive with celebration, when communities gathered not to labor, but to rejoice.
For much of the year, life in medieval Persia revolved around work. Fields required attention. Businesses demanded effort. Families managed endless responsibilities. But not every day was devoted to labor. Scattered throughout the calendar were festivals, holidays, and celebrations that brought communities together. These occasions offered something precious, a break from routine, a chance to celebrate life. One of the most important celebrations was the Persian New Year. The arrival of spring symbolized renewal. After the hardships of winter, the landscape slowly awakened. Flowers appeared, fields turned green, warmer days returned. People welcomed the season with joy and optimism. Families cleaned their homes, prepared special meals, visited relatives and friends. The atmosphere felt hopeful. Markets became busy, homes filled with activity. Communities gathered to mark the beginning of another year. Weddings also served as important celebrations. Families traveled long distances to attend. Guests shared food and conversation. Music echoed through courtyards. For a short time, worries about harvests, taxes, and daily responsibilities faded into the background. Religious festivals carried deep significance as well. They provided opportunities for reflection, gratitude, and community gathering. People attended ceremonies, shared meals, supported charitable efforts, and strengthened social bonds. Children often looked forward to these occasions most of all. Festivals brought excitement, special foods, games, stories, and opportunities to spend time with friends and relatives. For many families, these moments became treasured memories. Even modest celebrations carried importance. A successful harvest, the birth of a child,
The return of a traveler after a long journey. Ordinary events often became reasons for gathering together. In a world filled with uncertainty, celebrations reminded people of what truly mattered: family, friendship, community, and hope for the future. The laughter heard during these gatherings provided balance against the hardships of everyday life. For a little while, people could simply enjoy being together. And as evening fell over villages and cities, music often became part of the celebration. Because throughout Persia, music and storytelling held a special place in people's lives.
When the day's work was finally finished and darkness settled across the land, people searched for ways to relax. Modern entertainment did not exist. There were no televisions, no streaming services, no smartphones. Yet medieval Persians were far from bored. Stories became one of the most important forms of entertainment. Families gathered together. Elders shared tales passed down through generations. Stories of heroes, travelers, kings, wise scholars, and legendary adventures. Children listened with fascination. Adults listened too, because storytelling connected communities to their history and traditions. Music filled many homes and celebrations. Musicians performed at festivals, weddings, and social gatherings. Simple instruments produced melodies that echoed through courtyards and marketplaces. Songs helped preserve memories, express emotions, and strengthen cultural identity. Poetry occupied a particularly respected position. Persian culture became famous for its poets and literary traditions. Many people enjoyed listening to verses recited aloud. Beautiful language carried power. Ideas and emotions flowed through carefully chosen words. Even ordinary evenings could become memorable through conversation. Neighbors visited one another, families shared stories about the day, travelers described distant places. News spread naturally through discussion. These moments created connections, they strengthened relationships, and helped make difficult lives more enjoyable. The evening hours offered something rare, a chance to pause,
to reflect, and to enjoy the company of others before another day of work began. Yet eventually every story reaches its conclusion, and so too does our journey through medieval Persia.
Imagine one last evening in a small Persian village. The sun is setting. Long shadows stretch across the ground. The heat of the day is fading. Farmers return from the fields. Animals settle into their shelters. Cooking fires begin to glow. A gentle calm spreads through the community. Children finish their games. Parents prepare the evening meal. Neighbors exchange greetings. The familiar rhythms of daily life continue. Nothing extraordinary is happening. And yet this ordinary moment reveals so much. This village represents countless communities that existed across medieval Persia. Places where people worked hard, faced challenges, raised families, and built meaningful lives. Most of the people who lived here left no written records behind. History rarely remembers their names. Yet they formed the foundation of society. Without them, cities could not thrive. Trade could not flourish. Civilization itself could not endure. Their stories deserve to be remembered. Because history is not only the story of rulers and empires, it is also the story of ordinary people.
Our journey through medieval Persia is now coming to an end. The village has grown quiet. The market stalls are empty. The roads have fallen silent. Above the rooftops, the stars shine brightly once more. Families gather inside their homes. Travelers rest within caravanserais. Shepherds watch over their flocks. The cool night air drifts across fields and deserts alike. Tomorrow, the cycle will begin again. Farmers will rise before dawn. Merchants will prepare their goods. Craftsmen will return to their workshops. Children will help their families. Life will continue as it has for generations. But tonight, the world is peaceful. The worries of the day have faded. The village rests beneath the vast Persian sky. And as the stars slowly move overhead, we leave medieval Persia behind. Thank you for joining this gentle journey into the past. Sleep well, and until our next historical adventure, good night.